The scent of lilies, cloying and sweet, still clung to my clothes, a phantom shroud. It had been weeks since the funeral, but the weight of it, the hollow echo where her laughter used to be, pressed down on me like a physical thing. My wife was gone. The words still felt alien, a language I hadn't learned to speak. I found myself staring at walls, at the mundane objects of our shared life, each one a sharp shard of memory. The city had become a mausoleum of what was, every street corner a fresh wound. I needed to escape it. I needed to run until the memories couldn't catch me. That's why I was here now, behind the wheel of my packed car, the city fading into a distant haze in the rearview mirror. The road narrowed, winding through forests that grew thicker, taller, swallowing the light. My hands gripped the steering wheel, gripped tight. The air grew colder, even with the heater on. My breath plumed faintly in the cabin. This was it, the inheritance, the remote Victorian manor my estranged grandmother had left me. A fresh start, they said, a place to grieve in peace. It felt like driving into a forgotten past, a past I never knew I had. It had been in the bowels of the city during a particularly nasty network outage. I'd been crouched in a cramped concrete space, the air thick with the smell of ozone and damp earth. My job had been precise, logical, the problems tangible, frayed connections, broken lines. It was a mechanical quiet, predictable. It hummed with something else, something expectant. The gravel road crunched under the tires, a harsh, abrasive sound that seemed to announce my arrival. The trees finally parted, revealing it. The manor stood like a forgotten sentinel against the bruised twilight sky. Turrets poked into the clouds, their slate roofs crumbling. Ivy, thick as a man's arm, clawed its way up the walls, smothering windows like grasping hands. The paint on the gables peeled in long, curling strips, revealing patches of raw, weathered timber. A faint, earthy smell, like wet leaves and old stone, wafted through the open window, carrying with it a metallic tang I couldn't place. My pulse hammered against my ribs, a frantic drum against the encroaching stillness. This was no quaint refuge. This was a place that had been left to die. I killed the engine. The sudden quiet was absolute, punctuated only by the distant caw of a crow. I stepped out, my boots sinking slightly into the overgrown driveway. The air was heavy, damp, tasting of soil, and something else, something faintly sweet, like overripe fruit, but with an undercurrent of something acrid, almost like rust. A single pane on the second floor, high up in a gabled section, seemed to reflect the last sliver of dying light, a momentary glint that vanished as I watched, or did it? A wrought iron gate, rusted and half off its hinges, guarded the main path. I pushed it open. The shriek of corroded metal tore through the quiet, a sound that grated on my teeth. The path itself was choked with weeds, cracked flagstones hinting at a grandeur long past. As I approached the front door, I noticed the intricate carvings around the frame, grotesque faces, twisted vines, and something that looked like petrified hands reaching out. It felt ancient, heavy with untold stories. The air inside was still, stagnant, thick with the scent of dust, mildew, and something else, a faint, almost imperceptible floral note, like dried potpourri, but with an unsettling medicinal edge. I took a tentative step inside, my bootfalls echoing unnaturally loud on the marble floor. The sound seemed to linger, to multiply, as if other footsteps had joined mine. Had they? The manor swallowed the weak afternoon light whole, leaving only bruised shadows clinging to the high ceilings. Dust motes danced in the sparse beams that pierced the grimy windows, each particle a tiny, glittering memory of a life lived and then abandoned. I ran a hand over a mahogany newel post, its surface surprisingly smooth beneath a thick layer of grit. The house smelled of decay, of forgotten flowers and damp earth, a scent that clung to my clothes like the funeral lilies had. My wife's absence was a physical ache, a hollow space in my chest that the vast, empty room seemed to amplify. I started in the grand foyer, its patterned wallpaper peeling like sunburnt skin. A grand staircase, its banister carved with intricate swirling patterns, beckoned upwards into deeper gloom. I ignored it for now, choosing instead a door to my left, leading into what must have been a parlor. Velvet drapes, heavy with age, blocked most of the light. When I pulled one aside, a cloud of dust billowed, making me cough. The air felt thick, difficult to breathe, as if the house itself held its breath. An old upright piano sat against one wall, its keys a yellowed grin. I touched one, a low, discordant note vibrating through the room. My hand trembled. I told myself it was just the house, just the weight of its age, the unfamiliarity. My mind, still raw from loss, was playing tricks. That was all it could be. I moved on, pushing open another door, then another. The silence was profound, broken only by the creak of old wood and the whisper of my own breath. I found a study, its walls lined with books that smelled of mildew and dry paper. On a heavy oak desk, beneath a layer of dust, lay a leather-bound journal. I picked it up, feeling the worn texture beneath my fingers. It was blank inside, or at least the first few pages were. I set it down, promising myself to return. The light flickered then, a single bulb in the hallway outside the study. It pulsed, dimming, brightening, then settling back into its weak glow. I swore under my breath, old wiring obviously. The house was a century old at least. It would need a complete overhaul. I made a mental note to call the utility company, but a shiver ran down my spine, unrelated to the draft from the cracked window. I hugged myself, rubbing my arms. The house was settling. My nerves were frayed. That was the explanation. In a smaller room, a formal sitting area, I found a collection of framed photographs scattered on a dusty side table. They were sepia-toned, faded by time, showing stern-faced men and women in stiff, old-fashioned clothes. My grandmother was in one, younger, her eyes sharp and unsettling even then. Next to her, a man with a severe expression, his gaze seeming to bore into me from the past. Family, I supposed. Strangers, really. I didn't recognize most of them. I felt a prickle on my skin, as if their eyes followed me. The air tasted stale, metallic, like old pennies. I spun around, but nothing was there. My pulse hammered against my ribs, a frantic drum. "It's nothing," I muttered to myself, the sound swallowed by the vastness. Just the wind, just my imagination. I pushed through a heavy, unmarked door at the very back of the house, beyond the pantry, and found myself in a narrow, windowless corridor that seemed to lead nowhere. The corridor ended abruptly at another door, this one made of heavy, reinforced steel, rusted at the edges. A padlock thick with corrosion secured it. I tried the handle, it was solid, unyielding. The padlock was ancient, impossible to force without tools. What could be behind such a door? A storage room. A cellar. The very isolation of it, tucked away in this forgotten corner, made my skin prickle. A low hum, almost subliminal, vibrated through the steel, a faint, mechanical thrum. It wasn't the house settling. This was different. I retreated from the steel door, the hum seeming to follow me. My breath hitched. I needed to get out of this part of the house, needed to clear my head. I needed to check the power, the main breaker. The hum, I realized, was still there, faint but insistent, leading me not back towards the main breaker in the kitchen, but towards an external access point I'd noticed on the property map. A small, unassuming structure nestled amongst overgrown bushes, described as a fiber optic cable splice vault, network outage repair. It seemed out of place for such an old estate, a modern appendage. The small, windowless building was made of weathered concrete, its metal door scratched and peeling. The hum was louder here, a low, guttural vibration that seemed to emanate from beneath the earth itself. I found the latch, surprisingly unsecured, and pulled. The door groaned open, revealing a cramped, subterranean space. The air inside was thick, smelling of ozone and something metallic, like burnt wires. Fluorescent tubes, sickly yellow, flickered erratically, casting the interior in a strobe of uneasy light. Exposed bundles of cables, thick as my arm, snaked across the floor and up the walls, disappearing into conduits. The hum here was deafening, making my teeth ache. But it wasn't just the hum. Beneath it, just at the edge of hearing, was that faint, dry rustle again, like a breath drawn in. Was it just the electronics? The bare bulb in the narrow corridor buzzed, a sickly yellow halo struggling against the pervasive gloom. My breath plumed in the cold air, tasting of dust and something metallic. The smell of damp earth was stronger here, mixed with that acrid note like old battery acid or something long rotted. I ran a hand along the rough stone wall. Moisture beaded on the surface, chilling my fingertips. This wasn't just a pantry extension. It felt like a forgotten artery of the house, leading deeper, colder. It was irrational, this fear, this prickling awareness across my skin. I told myself it was the isolation, the grief, the sheer strangeness of this inherited place. I pushed through the growing unease, reaching into my pocket for my phone, its flashlight beam cutting a stark, artificial path through the black. The light revealed nothing but more rough-hewn stone, a dead end, then a heavy, bolted door scarred with age, a dead bolt, but it carried a familiar cadence, a ghost of a melody I knew intimately. My hand froze on the cold metal. Ice flooded my veins. I spun around, the phone light sweeping wildly. Nothing, just the dusty, empty corridor. My heart pounded harder, a frantic, trapped bird. No, it's the echo. Grief played tricks, tiredness. I hadn't slept properly in weeks. The air felt heavy, pressing against my eardrums. I could almost feel a presence, a weight in the space behind me, though nothing was there. I swallowed hard, the taste in my mouth metallic like fear. I needed to get out of this hallway. I needed to call someone. I scrolled through my contacts, landing on my colleague's name. He'd understand. He'd tell me I was just stressed. The call connected, but the line was thick with static. "Hello, can you hear me?" I yelled into the receiver, my voice sounding thin, reedy. "William, is that you? You're breaking up." His voice crackled, distant, annoyed. "Where are you, man? The reception's terrible." "I'm at the house," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Things are strange here. I think I heard something." Her voice. My voice cracked on the last word, a pause. "Look, William, I know it's tough. You're alone in that big place. Your mind's playing tricks. Get some rest. You've been through a lot." He wasn't hearing me. He couldn't. He thought I was just unraveling. The static grew louder, a buzzing shroud around his dismissive words. "I'll call you back when the signal's better," he said, and the line went dead. It pressed like cotton in my ears, thick and suffocating. My colleague's words echoed, "Mind's playing tricks." They was I. A wave of nausea twisted through me. The house felt like it was closing in, not literally but psychologically. I stumbled back towards the pantry, desperate for the familiar, if still unsettling, rooms. I paced the dusty drawing room, the scent of lavender and old paper doing little to calm my frayed nerves. The house felt like a living thing, breathing around me. I needed to reconnect, to prove I wasn't losing it. The internet was spotty, the landline dead. I remembered a passing comment my grandmother had made years ago about the house's peculiar wiring, a self-contained system. She'd mentioned a fiber optic cable splice vault, network outage repair in the old cellar, a place she claimed was ahead of its time for a house this old. Perhaps the main line was down. I found the cellar door hidden behind a stack of moth-eaten tapestries in the back hall. The cellar was vast, a labyrinth of damp stone and forgotten junk, but in one corner, bathed in the glow of a single, flickering fluorescent tube, was a more modern, sealed door. A faded label, barely legible, read, "Fiber optic cable splice vault, network outage repair." The hum of unseen machinery vibrated through the concrete floor beneath my boots. I pushed the heavy door open. The air inside was cool, dry, and smelled of ozone and clean metal, a stark contrast to the rest of the house. Rows of blinking lights pulsed on intricate panels, a spiderweb of colored cables snaking across the walls. This was a technological heart, incongruous in the belly of a decaying Victorian manor. I ran my hand along a cool metal casing, feeling the faint tremor of power. Then I saw it, tucked behind a thick bundle of yellow cables, a small, framed photograph. It was a picture of my wife smiling, taken years ago on our honeymoon. My hand reached for it, fingers brushing the cool glass. "You shouldn't be here, William." His voice, clear. The scent of her perfume, that delicate jasmine she always wore, filled my lungs, sharp and sudden. I spun around, my heart seizing in my chest. Just the blinking lights, the hum, the sterile smell of the vault. But the jasmine lingered, clinging to my clothes, my skin. My breath hitched. Was this a trick of memory, a cruel, vivid hallucination, or was she here? Was she really here, trapped in this house, warning me? My head throbbed, a dull ache behind my eyes. I gripped the photograph, my grip tight. What was real? What wasn't? Her voice, clear. Not a whisper this time, but as if she stood right behind me. But the jasmine, it lingered, a phantom sweetness in the stale, metallic air of the fiber optic cable splice vault. Network outage repair. My breath hitched. My pulse hammered against my ribs, a frantic drum. I stood there, muscles locked, staring into the empty space behind me. My gaze darted across the bundles of cables, the gray metal racks, the single, flickering fluorescent tube that cast the small room in sickly, stuttering light. Nothing, no movement, no form. Only the low thrum of the equipment, a constant, vibrating presence that seemed to resonate deep in my bones. I closed my eyes, inhaling deeply, trying to catch the jasmine again. It was gone, replaced by the sharp tang of ozone and the dry, ancient dust that coated every surface. Had I imagined it, a trick of grief, a desperate mind manufacturing solace? My hands trembled. Cold sweat slicked my palms. I clenched my jaw, forcing myself to turn back to the half-repaired connection. This wasn't helping. I needed to finish this, get out. My fingers, usually steady, fumbled with the tiny wires. Each connection felt like an impossible task, my focus fractured by the lingering echo of her voice, the ghost of her scent. The air in the vault seemed to press in on me, heavy and suffocating, though it was no different than moments before. My skin prickled. I could feel every hair on my arms, every nerve alive with an awareness that screamed wrong. I pushed through it, forcing myself to concentrate to complete the circuit. Finally, with a soft click, the connection was secure. The technician, who had been waiting patiently outside the vault, gave a nod of approval as the indicator lights on his diagnostic tablet glowed green. I didn't wait for congratulations. I stepped back into the cool night air, leaving the vault and its phantom behind me, but the fear, the certainty of what I'd experienced clung to me like a shroud, heavier, more expectant. But the voice in the vault, her distinct perfume that had been too real, too specific to dismiss as mere hallucination. It wasn't just my grief playing tricks. Something else was at work here, something in this house, something that knew me, knew her. This was a message, a deliberate, targeted assault on my sanity. My grandmother had lived here for decades. She must have known. She must have left something. I was no longer merely reacting. I was going to find answers. Now it felt like a library of secrets waiting to be unlocked. The air was thick with the scent of aged paper and dried potpourri, a faint, forgotten sweetness that fought against the pervasive dust. I ran my hands over the polished mahogany desk, the surface smooth and cool beneath my fingertips, imagining her sitting there, writing. I pulled open drawers, one after another, their wooden runners groaning softly in protest. Inside, I found stacks of meticulously organized bills, faded photographs of people I didn't recognize, and a collection of dried flowers pressed between the pages of an antique botanical guide. No hidden letters, no cryptic notes. It was an old piece, intricately carved, heavy and solid. I remembered her keeping it locked always. A childhood memory surfaced, of her sharp reprimand when my curious fingers had strayed too close to its ornate handles. I approached it now, a strange sense of anticipation tightening my chest. I traced the carvings with my fingers, feeling the smooth, worn wood, the subtle grooves. The cabinet felt warm to the touch, almost alive. I pushed and pulled at the doors, but they remained stubbornly shut. My fingers explored the frame, searching for a seam, a catch, anything that felt out of place. The wood was seamless, perfectly fitted. Then my hand brushed against a small, almost invisible knot in the wood near the bottom right hinge. It wasn't a knot. It was a button, cleverly disguised. I pressed it. A faint click echoed in the silent room, surprisingly loud. A section of the cabinet, disguised as part of the decorative molding, swung inward with a soft groan, revealing a narrow, hidden compartment. A plume of ancient dust puffed into the air, carrying with it a faint, sweet smell of decay and old paper. My heart began to race. This was it. Inside, nestled amongst yellowed silk, was a leather-bound journal. Its cover was worn smooth, the edges frayed. The paper, when I carefully pulled it free, was brittle and thin, crumbling slightly at the corners. It smelled of time and secrets. My grandmother's familiar, elegant script filled the first few pages, but as I turned them, the handwriting grew increasingly erratic, frantic even. My eyes scanned the words, my breath catching in my throat. Soft at first, like wind through the eaves, but then, closer, they speak of demands of a debt to be paid. I swallowed hard, the taste in my mouth metallic, dry. My gaze flew to the next entry, dated several months later. I hear them in the walls now, in the floorboards, always watching, always waiting. They want something from the blood. My sleep is gone, my mind. This wasn't the ramblings of an old woman. He spoke of it, the stranger. He knew of the pact. He said it was ancient, binding, my ancestors. What did they do? What have they promised? It demands its due, always demands its due, and the chorale, it sings, always the chorale. My eyes widened, the pact, the chorale. It wasn't just my grandmother, it wasn't just me. This was a legacy, a lineage. I wasn't alone in this house. I was just the latest in a long line. What pact? What debt? What did it demand? The revelation of the pact, a lineage of terror, had left me reeling. My grandmother, her whispers, the chorale, it wasn't just a ghost story confined to the crumbling walls of the manor. It was a current flowing through generations, and I was caught in its tide. The air in the study felt thick, heavy with unspoken histories, each dust mote dancing in the afternoon light, a silent witness. I gripped the edge of the antique desk, the polished wood cool beneath my fingers, anchoring myself to something solid. My phone, a dead weight in my pocket, offered no solace. No signal, of course. The house, the land, it seemed to swallow all modern conveniences, severing every connection to the outside. I remembered the estate manager mentioning something about a network outage repair a few miles down the old service road, a point where the fiber optic lines converged. A flimsy hope, perhaps, but it was a plan, a physical destination away from the immediate, stifling presence of the house. The drive was short, a jarring transition from the overgrown lane to a barely paved access road. The landscape flattened, trees thinning out, replaced by a vast, desolate stretch of scrubland. Ahead, a low, squat concrete building emerged from the haze, utterly incongruous with the pastoral surroundings. It was a functional, forgotten structure, all gray concrete and rusting metal, devoid of windows, its single heavy steel door looking like the entrance to a tomb. This was it, the fiber optic cable splice vault, network outage repair. My pulse hammered against my ribs. The sudden silence was immense, broken only by the tick of cooling metal and the distant, mournful cry of a hawk. A faint, almost imperceptible hum vibrated in the air, a low thrum that seemed to sink into my bones. I hesitated, my hand on the door handle, a knot of unease tightening in my stomach. Was I truly desperate enough to seek connection in such a place? The air tasted metallic, sharp with the scent of damp earth and something else, something acrid and electrical like ozone after a storm. What if this wasn't an escape but another trap? Pushing aside the gnawing doubt, I forced myself out of the car. The gravel crunched under my boots, a loud, lonely sound in the stillness. My breath plumed in the frigid air. The steel door, unpainted and scarred, had a heavy latch that groaned in protest as I wrestled it open. Wires snaked everywhere, a tangle of black and orange cables disappearing into conduits that lined the walls, humming faintly, a low, guttural vibration that resonated in my chest. I pulled out my phone, holding it up like a talisman. No signal, of course not. I was a fool. This was a dead end, a wasted journey, and now I was trapped in this concrete box, the hum of the wires a mocking chorus. That's when the humming intensified, rising in pitch, a high, piercing whine that scraped at my teeth. My heart leaped into my throat, then I heard it. It was her voice, my wife's voice. It was indistinct at first, a shifting, nebulous form, then it sharpened, gaining definition, gaining substance. My wife stood there, her silhouette unmistakable, the curve of her neck, the fall of her hair. But something was wrong, terribly wrong. Her head was tilted at an unnatural angle, her limbs too long, too thin, stretching like distorted reflections in warped glass. It was laced with an impossible sorrow, a pain that was hers, yet twisted into something predatory. The decay smell intensified, thick and cloying, mixed with the faint, sweet scent of her favorite perfume, now sickeningly wrong. I wanted to scream, but my throat was tight, constricted, my lungs burning. My skin prickled, every nerve ending screaming in protest. Her mouth opened too wide, showing too many teeth, each one impossibly sharp, impossibly white. The image of her, my love, my lost wife, was a blade twisting in my gut, a horror crafted specifically for me, for my deepest wound. My hand scrabbled for purchase, my fingers finding only rough, damp stone. This wasn't a memory. This wasn't grief. This was something else, something malicious, wearing her skin like a grotesque disguise. The image shimmered, wavered, then lunged. A silent scream tore through me. The touch was like ice, burning, searing. I slid down the wall, gasping for air, my body shaking uncontrollably. My eyes darted around the empty vault, searching, praying it wasn't real. It was gone. It knew me. It knew my pain. What other horrors did it have waiting, crafted from the shattered pieces of my life? The air in the study felt thick, heavy with the dust of forgotten lives and the metallic tang of my own fear. I swallowed, the taste of it coating my tongue, dry and bitter. This wasn't a choice anymore. This was a fight. My hands, trembling slightly, reached for the stacks of books and papers my grandmother had left scattered. Her frantic scrawl filled marginalia, linking forgotten names to arcane symbols. The pages, brittle and yellowed, crumbled at the edges, shedding fine dust that tickled my nostrils. Inside, pressed between two pages, was a faded photograph. Her features were strikingly similar to my own. Was she one of us? I pored over the texts, my eyes blurring, trying to decipher the archaic language and cryptic diagrams. The book spoke of cycles, of offerings, of a presence that fed on what made us, memory, identity. I found mention of the taking, a local term for unexplained disappearances that often coincided with periods of intense family activity at the manor. It was always during the autumn, always my wife, her death. The timing was too precise. How many had been caught in this tide? The local library was a low, squat building near the town square, smelling of old paper and something vaguely chemical, like disinfectant trying to mask decay. The librarian, a woman with spectacles perched on her nose and a severe bun, looked up with an air of mild annoyance when I approached. I asked about local history, old families, anything pertaining to the surrounding woods. She seemed to stiffen. Her eyes, magnified by the thick lenses, flickered with an unreadable emotion. Not much truth to them, I'd say. But her gaze lingered on me, a silent question in her depth. I flipped through the brittle pages. Stories of children wandering into the woods and returning changed, silent, their eyes vacant. Farmers losing their way only to be found days later, muttering about voices and impossible shapes. The chorale, it wasn't just in the house. It was everywhere. Why did she look at me like that? Back at the manor, the internet connection in the study flickered and died. A network outage, the provider's automated message claimed. I needed more information. I needed to cross-reference dates, names. Desperation gnawed at me. I remembered seeing a small utility building on the edge of town near the old mill. A sign for fiber optic cable splice vault, network outage repair had been tacked to its corroded metal door. It was a long shot, but maybe someone there could tell me when the service would be restored, or if there was a local terminal I could access. The vault was a squat, windowless concrete structure, nestled between a thicket of tangled brush and a crumbling stone wall. A low, persistent hum emanated from within, vibrating through the ground. The air here was thick with the smell of damp earth, ozone, and something else, a faint metallic tang that raised the hairs on my arms. The heavy steel door, scarred with rust, stood slightly ajar. I pushed it open, the groan of protesting hinges echoing in the enclosed space. Inside, the fluorescent bulbs flickered, casting the small room in sickly green intervals. Wires, thick as ropes, snaked across the floor, leading into a series of blinking, humming machines. No one was there. Condensation beaded on its surface. My reflection, distorted and pale in the polished chrome, stared back at me, eyes wide with a fear I couldn't quite contain. It was like the rustling of dry leaves or the soft breath of someone standing just behind me. I spun around. Nothing. Was it the Corail reaching out even here, or was my mind simply playing tricks, twisting the mundane into the menacing? I pressed my ear to the metal wall, trying to discern the source of the sound. It felt like a direct address. A warning. What was it trying to tell me? I stumbled out of the vault, the fresh air feeling both a relief and a betrayal. Back in the manor, the research from the library and my grandmother's journals began to coalesce into a horrifying mosaic. The family tree, annotated with cryptic symbols and dates, showed a pattern of sudden disappearances, unexplained madness, and a strange, recurring illness that stole memories. The thing in the woods, the Corail, the pact, it was all one terrifying truth. My ancestors had made a deal, and the price was sanity, memory, and ultimately, life itself. I was the next designated host, the next sacrifice. What did the Corail want with me? The air in the study felt thick, heavy with the weight of that truth pressing against my eardrums. I pushed myself from the desk, my chair scraping against the dusty floorboards. The desire to simply leave was a physical ache, a desperate clawing in my gut. I turned to the door, the one I had just entered through, but it wasn't there. My breath hitched. No hinge, no knob, no seam. Just wall. My mind raced, trying to find a logical explanation. Had I turned around, was this a different wall? No, the window was still to my left, the fireplace directly opposite. The room hadn't spun, the exit had simply ceased to exist. My eyes darted around the room, searching for another way out, for any sign of a trick, a hidden panel. But the study, once a comfort, now felt like a cage. Could the house itself be doing this? I stumbled towards the far wall, where another door typically led to the main hall. Locked, of course. Panic began to claw its way up my throat. Nothing. The house absorbed my efforts, mocking them. The air, once merely thick, now tasted of dust and something metallic like old pennies. My throat tightened. I needed to find a way out anyway. The main staircase, the back entrance, a window, anything. I tried the study door again, convinced I had simply overlooked something. Still a wall. I turned, my eyes wide. Searching, was the room shrinking. No, that was absurd. But the walls felt closer, the ceiling lower, the air more constricted. I could smell the faint, cloying scent of dried roses and damp earth, a scent that always followed my grandmother's spectral presence. He was here. It was here. I found myself in what I thought was the dining room, but the grand table was gone, replaced by stacks of ancient, moldering books. Dust motes danced in the slivers of light filtering through the grimy windows. I pushed through a heavy velvet curtain, expecting to find the conservatory, but instead, I was in a narrow, unlit corridor I had never seen before. The walls here were rough-hewn stone, sweating with moisture, and the air was thick with the smell of mildew and stagnant water. Each step I took echoed, amplifying the sound of my own ragged breathing. Where was I? This wasn't part of the manor I knew. My hands scraped against the damp stone, the rough texture sending shivers up my arm. I could hear a faint, persistent hum, a low thrumming sound that vibrated through the floor. It was a mechanical sound out of place in this decaying house. My mind, already frayed, struggled to make sense of it. I pushed on, desperate for any sign of familiarity, any exit. The hum grew louder, more insistent, a high-pitched whine that set my teeth on edge. I pushed open a heavy, rusted metal door, the hinges groaning in protest, and stepped into a space that defied all logic. It was an industrial cavern, lit by a single bare bulb hanging from the ceiling, casting a sickly yellow glow. Wires snaked across the floor, thick bundles of cables running into bulky, humming machinery. The air was heavy with the smell of ozone and old dust, a sharp, metallic tang that made my nose burn. This was a fiber optic cable splice vault, network outage repair. My eyes scanned the unfamiliar equipment, the racks of servers, the glowing indicator lights. Why would a Victorian manor, even one with secrets, possess such a thing? My gaze fell upon a bundle of thick, rainbow-colored cables, cleanly severed. They lay on the floor, their exposed ends like raw wounds. An axe, heavy and glinting, rested beside them, deliberate. My isolation wasn't accidental. My breath caught in my chest. This wasn't just a house, it was a trap, a living mechanism designed to cut me off, to consume me. For a moment, a flicker of hope ignited. If I could just repair the connection, reach out, call for help. I knelt, my fingers trembling as I reached for the tools. My hand felt alien, clumsy. It wasn't distinct, more like a deeper absence of light, a ripple in the air. My head snapped up. There was nothing. But the hair on my arm stood on end, prickling with a sudden, intense awareness. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic bird trapped in my chest. I dropped the pliers with a clatter that echoed too loudly in the confined space. Was I truly alone in this place? The hum of the vault receded, or perhaps I simply stopped hearing it. My reflection, caught in the polished surface of a metal panel, stared back at me. But it wasn't quite my face. The eyes were too wide, the mouth a fraction too stretched. A pressure began to build in my chest, a weight I couldn't explain, making each breath a shallow, desperate gasp. The metallic taste in my mouth intensified, a flavor of fear and something else, something ancient and hungry. The hum returned, but now it was deeper, a resonant thrum that vibrated in my bones, a sound that felt less like machinery and more like a vast, inhuman throat. My grandmother's voice, then my wife's, twisted, elongated, distorted. "Give in, William. Let go." They were telling me to give up, to surrender. My vision blurred, the edges of the room swimming. I fought it, tried to push back, but my legs buckled. I felt myself falling, not through space, but through something else, something far more terrifying. When I finally hit the ground, the impact wasn't physical. It was as if my very self was shattering into a million pieces. Would I ever truly wake from this nightmare? Or would I simply become another echo in the chorale? The air in the study felt thick, heavy with the dust of forgotten lives, the metallic tang of old blood, or perhaps just my own fear. I stared at the faded ink of the ledger, my grandmother's spidery script, and the words blurred. Inheritor, anchor. It wasn't a choice then, it was an inheritance. I needed more. My grandmother had kept secrets, yes, but he had also kept records. A meticulous woman, even in her madness. I remembered a passing comment from the estate manager, a fleeting mention of her obsession with the manor's infrastructure, its veins and arteries, as he'd called them. He'd spoken of an old sub-basement, rarely accessed, where the original power lines and even some archaic communication conduits converged before the modern grid was laid. A place where nothing ever worked right, he'd said with a shudder, too much interference. Interference. The word echoed. I pulled out maps, blueprints yellowed with age, detailing the manor's subterranean levels. Most showed only cellars, wine storage, and old root cellar. But one, tucked beneath a stack of gardening ledgers, was different. It showed a deeper, irregular chamber labeled simply, Fiber Optic Cable Splice Vault, Network Outage Repair. The location was marked just beyond the deepest part of the old boiler room, beneath a section of the manor that had long been sealed off. Why would a Victorian manor have such a place? Or had it been retrofitted, then forgotten? The smell of damp earth and rust filled my nose, mingling with the faint, acrid scent of ozone. The floor was rough concrete, uneven, patched. At the far end, behind a rusted grate, I found it a narrow opening, barely wide enough for me to squeeze through. It led into a cramped, low-ceilinged tunnel, barely braced with splintered timbers. I had to hunch, my shoulders scraping the rough-hewn rock. The tunnel opened into a small, circular chamber. This was it. The Fiber Optic Cable Splice Vault, Network Outage Repair. No hum of electricity, no blinking lights. But around the edges, the ancient rock walls were still visible, rough and unyielding. My light swept across them, catching on something etched into the stone. Not carved, not scratched, but burned into the rock as if by immense heat. A series of symbols, unfamiliar yet disturbing, spiraled inward towards a central, deeper indentation. The air grew heavy, pressing against my eardrums. I could almost taste the air, thick and metallic, like holding a penny on my tongue. My heart hammered, but I couldn't tear my eyes from the symbols. As I traced them with my gaze, a horrifying clarity began to settle over me. The lines, the curves, they weren't just abstract. They depicted a cycle, a family generation after generation offering something. And in return, a vast, swirling emptiness held at bay. The central indentation was not just a mark. It was a template, my hand. The images coalesced in my mind, stark and undeniable. The pact. It wasn't about gaining power as I'd first feared. It was a shield. Generations ago, my ancestors had faced something even worse than the Coriel, something so utterly devastating that they had struck a bargain, a horrifying trade. They would offer an inheritor, a designated vessel, to anchor this lesser evil, this Coriel, and in doing so, keep the greater horror from breaking through. I was not just a victim, I was the chosen one, the next anchor. My wife's death, the hallucinations, the manor itself, all part of the elaborate, generations-long preparation for me. A low thrum began in the floor beneath my feet, vibrating up through my worn boots. The metal cabinet hummed, a low, resonant note that seemed to sink into my bones. The symbols on the wall began to glow faintly, a sickly, internal luminescence. I felt a presence, vast and ancient, coalescing around me, recognizing me. It knew I understood, it knew I was here. My head swam, nausea twisting through me. My vision blurred at the edges, the vault walls seeming to recede, then press in, expanding and contracting like a breathing lung. Sacrifice. And then another word, a soundless scream that shredded my composure. Mine. The thrumming intensified, a vibration that shook my teeth. My breath hitched. This was not a bargain I could refuse. This was not a choice. This was my destiny, laid out in forgotten stone and inherited fear. What would happen when the greater horror, the one the pact kept at bay, finally broke through? The air in the study felt thick, heavy with the weight of that truth pressing on my chest until my lungs burned. My pulse hammered against my ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. I had to leave. Now. My feet moved on their own, a desperate scramble up the grand staircase. Each step groaned under my weight, a lament. I didn't bother packing. What was there to take? Memories. They were the very things trying to consume me. I would not stay. I yanked it open, the old wood protesting with a shriek that echoed through the empty halls. I scrambled inside, the engine sputtering to life after a few anxious turns of the key. I jammed the gear into reverse, gravel crunching under the tires, and sped down the long, winding drive. The familiar road, usually a ribbon of cracked asphalt winding through ancient oaks, felt alien. The trees pressed in closer than I remembered, their skeletal branches clawing at the moonless sky. A thick, unnatural fog began to roll in, not from the distant bay, but from the very ground swirling around the headlights, reducing visibility to mere feet. The scent of wet earth and something else, something metallic and sharp, permeated the air, making my stomach clench. My hands gripped the steering wheel, gripped tight, as I squinted through the shifting gray. The road signs, usually illuminated by my beams, seemed to vanish, swallowed by the encroaching mist. Panic clawed at my throat. I drove for what felt like an hour, but the landscape never changed. My fuel gauge, which should have been dropping, seemed stuck. Then, through a momentary thinning of the mist, I saw it. A utility truck, its amber hazard lights blinking weakly in the haze. Relief surged through me, a desperate, fleeting hope. Someone else. A connection. I pulled over, my tires hissing on the damp pavement, and killed the engine. The sudden silence was deafening, broken only by the drip of moisture from unseen leaves. The air tasted of ozone and something burnt, bitter on my tongue. The truck sat abandoned, its door ajar. No driver, no sounds of activity. I called out, my voice swallowed by the fog. Hello, anyone? Only the echo of my own fear answered. Then I saw the reason for the truck. A small temporary enclosure had been erected by the roadside, a tent-like structure of canvas and aluminum poles. A temporary sign propped against a tool chest read, Fiber optic cable splice vault, network outage repair. Network outage. No signal, no way out, not really. This wasn't a road crew, it was a trap. The air around the enclosure shimmered, distorting the already blurry outlines of the trees. A low hum vibrated through the ground, rising slowly, like a giant, unseen insect. It grew louder, pressing against my eardrums, rattling the bones in my skull. The metallic tang in the air intensified, burning my nostrils. I backed away, stumbling, my legs heavy and unresponsive. Suddenly, the hum became a roar, a chorus of unseen voices, not words, but a cacophony of sound that resonated deep within my chest. The fog swirled violently, coalescing into indistinct, towering shapes at the edges of my vision. A force, invisible but undeniably physical, slammed into me. It wasn't a push, it was a pull. My feet lost purchase on the damp ground, dragged backwards with terrifying speed. I scrabbled at the air, my nails tearing at nothing, a choked cry escaping my lips. The trees blurred, the truck vanished, the fiber optic cable splice vault. Network outage repair sign, a fleeting image in the swirling gray. The metallic taste in my mouth turned to copper, sharp and hot. I felt like I was being stretched, pulled apart, my very being unraveling. Then with a sickening thud, I was thrown. My head cracked against something hard and unforgiving. A wave of blinding pain. The smell of dust and old roses, the manor's permanent perfume, filled my senses. I lay sprawled on the polished floor of the grand foyer, a broken doll. The front door, which I had left wide open, was now firmly shut, the heavy oak mocking my desperate flight. My body ached, every muscle screaming in protest. A warm, sticky wetness bloomed at the back of my head. I touched it, my fingers coming away red. The manor had pulled me back. It hadn't let me go. I was a puppet on its strings, and the strings extended far beyond its crumbling walls. What else did it control?